All right. This video was originally going to be out earlier, but I first ended up getting sucked down the rabbit hole of, getting used to the drawing software that I'm using for this animation. If any of you are interested, I'm using Sprite because I bought it a few years back. But that took a while, and then I finally got sick of my current or previous organization system that I was using to keep track of my videos, and so I reorganized it. So, as you would figure, the first time I started this, I did what almost everyone probably would do for this, which is create a folder and put the video file into the folder. Now, for me at the time, that wasn't super rough because it was just an audio file and then a video file, and then that was just one video, and then it was never touched again. So the hold on. The setup that I had was ridiculously unorganized. So I went through and bit the bullet because it's better to do it when I have less videos than in the future when I have way more videos. So and my videos are getting more complicated. So at this point, it's like I have audio and video, and now I have thumbnails too. Like the whole shebang. And then I also have like a background music file, which I plan on making more of those at some point. But we get to it as we get to it. It's the way of the hobbyist. But we I had to go through and I had to actually organize everything. So I finally bit the bullet and did that. I'm still not gonna change my bad numbering system, and I know that it's a bad numbering system. And the reason I'm not gonna change that is because you can't make me, and I will just deal with the slight obnoxiousness that is a little bit. I found a workaround which made it so I only have to deal with the numbering system for 30 days worth of videos, or 35-ish days worth of videos. So I dealt with the number system by not dealing with the number system. We love to see it. So that's why this video is out a bit later than it was. The sleep schedule is coming back in. It should be done and fixed up by the end of the week, which is great. And life is good. So, all of that. Now, I wanted to have this be a slightly longer video and just talk, kind of go back to the ramblings at some point, and I came across an interesting thought process, and I specifically didn't go through and deep dive into it, so that I could like work it out on recording, because there's some, I see you, viewer. Yeah, I heard that you enjoy the rambling sometimes, so might as well if I'm gonna do it anyway. Anyway, last bit is the thumbnail for today is the start of the animation process. So that's going to be the start of the background of the animation process. I still have a few different layers to get to it left, but I didn't. A lot of things have been eating up my time today, and this has been put off enough already, so might as well get to it. Anyway, the subject that I was diving into was luck. Specifically, if I were to look at myself from an outside perspective, would I consider myself lucky? And then that evolved into the question of, well, what does it mean to be lucky, right? So if I looked at myself from an outside perspective, uh, I have three different perspectives I could try to go from, right? One of them, which is the unrealistic one, is look at myself from someone in nearly the exact same position I'm in. Now, I've lived a highly unique life, so that's already hard to find. And then it's on top of that, it's ridiculously difficult to find someone who's gone through the same kind of stuff that you have. But if I were to look at myself from that perspective, would I consider myself lucky? And it's hard to say. Uh, it's hard to say on that one. So then I went, okay, cool. So if I can't tell from there, let's look at myself from the perspective of someone who is way more than me. Would I consider myself lucky? And then it came to the question of, uh, how does the person have more than me, right? Is it more wealth? Is it more family? Is it more social relationships? Do they just feel better about themselves? So then it got me thinking, why does that matter for understanding luck, right? Okay, so luck seems to have some sort of thing about possession of something, right? Because that's the characterization that we're using. But it's not just possession of something, it's how someone got the possession of something. Okay, now that's a bit more interesting. That sounds kind of like luck. We're getting around there. If someone gains something through through means that weren't via their own merit, seems to be the running definition of luck that I'm presuming this other person has that's looking at me from the outside perspective. Yeah, that gets a little trippy when you start when you start really disassociating like that. But um, so when someone gains something through means at which they did not gain it through their own merit. Okay, that doesn't seem quite right. There seems to be some sort of balance to it because it's really hard to say that someone got it through their merit alone and nobody else's, right? Because if you break it down, you can ask, well, what about the people who taught you, and what about the people you learned from? What about the environment you grew up in? What about X, Y, Z? Okay, so there seems to be some balance, but someone seems to be lucky when they move past the tipping point where they are no longer being carried by their merit, or at least the majority of what they're doing isn't carried by their merit. Okay, so that doesn't quite seem right either. And the reason that doesn't quite seem right either is because no one calls someone lucky when they walk downstairs. I suppose some people do. Okay, let's look at this. There's also a category of luck versus deserve. Okay, so if someone goes through something really harsh and then gets something out of it via not their own merit, you wouldn't call them lucky. For example, if you're in a hurricane and the hurricane blows by and you just get wrecked by the hurricane, but you're not dead, people don't necessarily call that luck. Now, I would say that most people would say it's unfortunate that you got into the hurricane, and then they break it down into positions where they look at it where it was unlucky that you got into the hurricane and lucky that you survived. Okay, so now there's areas in which luck seems to be dependent on how big or small your scope is of what you're looking for. Okay, so if you're looking very small scope, it becomes very easy to say lucky, unlucky, lucky, unlucky, lucky, unlucky. You stub your toe in the morning as you're walking and it hurts, unlucky. You go downstairs because of it to try to get an ice pack from the freezer, okay? So you walk downstairs and your sibling is making food and they have extra. Okay, now you're lucky. Great, but across that whole morning, are you lucky or unlucky? And that's a harder thing to say, because it's, well, was it worth the does the stubbing of the toe balance out the getting of the breakfast? Now that goes into how you're measuring luck, and you can measure luck in probably two. You can measure it two types of ways, right? Or at least let's say that there's two types of ways to measure it. The first way to measure it would be the amount of encounters that you've had. So you bird poops on your shoulder and you can't find a parking spot for 20 minutes and you I don't know, you get stuck in the rain. Those are three different unlucky situations. So you have three bad luck situations. And then you win the lottery and get $1 million. And that's one good luck situation. So if we're counting amounts of encounters, then you're unlucky for having your $1 million does not counteract the getting pooped on by a bird and getting stuck in the rain and not finding a traffic spot. Intuitively, that doesn't make sense. Intuitively, I don't think that most people would measure luck that way. Now, there is something to say about how people experience their life and how they focus on people tend to focus on negative things, but that's slightly separate than what we're saying luck is, because we're saying that luck is this objective thing, which is when you gain something that when you achieve something that wasn't achieved mainly by your own merit. Okay, great. So if you have good teammates, then you were lucky to have good teammates who helped you succeed. If you have a good upbringing, you were lucky to have a good upbringing that helped you succeed. But if you learn to, run a business and you pull it up by its bootstraps all the way up, then you weren't necessarily lucky for that one. Great. So back to how to measure luck. Sorry, I've been scratching my hair. I gotta get a haircut at some point, so you'll probably hear that in the background. But how to measure luck? I think that we tend to measure luck by the amount that it benefits you. So it's well, let's look at it one way. Let's say that we can measure luck like it's a plus system. Okay, cool. So let's use the same scenario, and it's a plus minus system. Cool. Bird poops on your shoulder, -1. Can't find a parking lot, -1. You get stuck in the rain, -1. Okay, so that's -3, and then you win the lottery and get $1 million, plus 100. Great. So now you're sitting at 97 luck. Awesome. I don't think that people run off of that system either. And the reason I don't think people run off of that system either is because if the same person who did that was broke and homeless, you'd be like, dude, you were super lucky, good job. And then if the person who did that was a billionaire, they would go, oh, well, that's just $1 million. So they would probably go, that's undeserving of that person who already had so much to have it. And then they would probably no longer categorize it as luck. They would categorize it as unfair. And not to say that someone being lucky isn't normally categorized as unfair, but there's different situations about it. Now, I would still say that most people would say that the person who didn't have anything and gained a ton was more lucky than the person who already had a ton and gained relatively less so. So, that's not to say about the deserving part necessarily. That's a whole other video. But the running of luck seems to be if someone gained if someone advanced in what would the word for that be? Cuz if someone gained a large, cuz it's an increase in it's the difference between the two, right? So I'm trying to find the word cuz the difference between like 1 and 20 is greater than the difference between uh the is greater than the overall difference between 100,000 and 100,050. Because you already have the 100,000, there's a slight uh it'd be a return on investment, wouldn't it? Okay, so it'd be luck would be the person who gets a lucky person would be someone who gets a high return on investment through types of actions that were achieved in ways that weren't based off of their own merit. Okay, cool. So that's what we have as lucky. Now, would I be someone who has achieved a ton based off of actions that weren't mainly from my own merit? That's a hard question to answer. One of the difficulties in answering that question is that I don't think I would be a fair judge for that. So I wouldn't necessarily be able to answer that, but I could definitely see a lot of people saying, yes, you were lucky. I could also see a good chunk of people saying, you were probably lucky at the beginning of stuff, and now you've started to surpass that. I would say that I would say that going off of that definition, I would say that I am lucky. Now, there's a insidious trick to this definition that I've specifically laid out, which was actually you've fallen for my trap card, the hidden purpose of this video. There's an understanding of luck that seems to be taken by a good chunk of people. Now, I actually don't subscribe to the definition of luck that we have come across. I do think that is mainly the definition that a lot of people tend to use, though. Now, what I mean by this is I don't think someone can be just lucky. Hypothetically, sure, I'll give it to you, whatever. Now, getting back to the real world, though, I don't think someone can be just lucky. I think that when you have luck, when you get lucky, it's actually a lot more akin to finding the situation in which all of the pieces align and then taking the shot. I think that this is something my dad told me a while back, and I love this idea. It's the deal of a century happens about once a week. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, what? That doesn't even make sense. It's like, fair enough. Let's break it down for you. So my dad taught me how to be an entrepreneur at a very young age, right? And doing some entrepreneurial work. Wow, that's a mouthful. I was sorry, I'm trying to say this without doxing myself. I was going through and I was doing a business opportunity, right? and it's a legitimately good business opportunity. Okay? And one of the things my dad says, because the business opportunity ended up falling through, and part of it was because uh, the the way in which I had presented myself to my dad a few different times beforehand. So he wasn't actually certain about the business opportunity, and he only realized it was one after he lost the chance at it. So there's a whole life lesson in there at some point too. But he said, don't worry about it too much because the opportunity of it, the deal of a century happens once every week. So what I take to mean from that is that there's a lot of moving pieces in the world. Now, there's benefits and drawbacks to having so many moving pieces. One of the drawbacks to having moving pieces is that there's a lot of things that you can get distracted by and keep track of and all the stuff. There's a lot there. But the benefit of that is that things tend to line up all the time. And if you can notice when they line up and you take the shot, then life starts to go really easy for you. Now, would I call this luck? Yeah, it probably falls under a lot of definitions of luck. But I think that one of the differences between people who are lucky and people who complain about other people being lucky is that the people who are lucky are people almost all the time who took the shot and actually lined up everything. Now you could go, well, what about those people who just bought like a lottery ticket and got $1 million? They didn't wait for everything to line up, and in most cases in those scenarios, the people who won millions of dollars through lottery tickets, drastically changing their lifestyle, they tend to be way less financially stable in the next 2 to 5 years because of it, because they don't properly take the shot. Now, the people who are financially stable after winning $1 million do tend to be the people who actually take the shot when the things line up. You would think that winning the $1 million is when all of the things, when the shot has landed, when you achieved the thing. I would actually argue that winning the $1 million is all of the things lining up. And what most people tend to do with it is they tend to squander all of that money. And so that becomes a little bit of a problem for them. But those are the kind of people who tend not to actually look for the opportunities in which they could be lucky, which is, I would say that if we're going off of the definition of luck, which is when you're in a situation in which you benefit from it based off of not mostly your own merit, I would say that if you're properly benefiting from it, it's because you're using your merit in a very specific manner, which is knowing when to strike. Now, I don't know if a lot of people tend to view luck this way, which is it's an opportunity presenter, but not something that just hands everything to you on a silver platter. Now, some people will be like, well, there's people who are just lucky, and I would say that there's just different sizes of silver platters, and if you don't portion your meal correctly, you will end up eating all of it, and then you will have nothing left over. And I think that a lot of people tend to view luck as the silver platter that came out of nowhere and eat as much of it as you possibly can. And that tends to cause people, I think that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of different problems. This is mainly a social media thing, and I get that social media is a high it tends to be a very, very big, what would the word be? It is an outspoken, well, no. It's a large sorting algorithm for the people who can get as much attention as possible. There's two types of people who can get as much attention as possible. The people who are genuinely good at what they do, and air quote lucky. They're good at utilizing the situation so that they don't have to work off of just their own merit to get there, or mostly their own merit to get there. I would say that being able to do that, you would be lucky, under some of the definitions we've been talking. But there's those people, and then there's the people who will complain about them. And the reason why both of these people exist in this situation is because people who are resentful will boost up other people. Sorry, like 6 different things hit my brain at once, and my sound box tried to say all things. So struggling here a little bit to try to stay coherent. Ramblings, whatnot. So, the people who are resentful of the people who utilize their time, money, and resources well tend to group together. And when they tend to group together, they will boost the person who they think is presenting what they want in the best possible way. So I'm sure you can think of pretty much anything on the internet for this. It's been happening a lot more recently. But you would take somebody who goes, hey, we should, there's a lot of different examples, but I'm not going to name names. It should be, hey, we should take down the people who have a lot of money and distribute it to the poor people. And if you look at them, they tend to have millions of dollars. And if anyone calls them out on that, they go, no, not us, the higher people. But the people who genuinely want to do that will support them because the words that they use are words that they agree with. And so you have people who go, oh, look at those people. They've done well for themselves. Good on them. And you go, other people going, grrr, I should have that. And then you have other people, and then so the performers are going, hey, look what I have. I've done this thing. And the audience goes two ways. And half the audience goes, oh, yeah, that's really cool. Good on you. And the other half of the audience goes, grr, that should be mine. And then another performer arises from that going, hey, see what they have? That should be yours. And the half the audience goes, yeah. I totally lost track of what I was saying with that, but I think I've started rambling into an entirely different social situation that I think that I should steer clear of because it's edging just a bit too close to politics. And politics is definitely not what I want this channel to be about. But I was having a thought, I was like, hey, would I be lucky? Probably, but I don't think that I'm here just because I was lucky, but I would definitely say that luck is a decent part of it, and I just knew how to utilize it well. Anyway, that was the thought I had, so it's a good 30-minute chat afterwards. So, yeah.